values to valued culture. Here is your host, Will Scott, interviewing another CEO about leading culture in their company.
So Mel, what prompted me, I've known you for many years and respected your work for many years, but what prompted me to reach out to you is when I got an email, and I definitely recommend that all my listeners do subscribe to your newsletter. It talked about the 3 pillars of leadership, which sounds like, of course, we have leaders in all kinds of walks of life, but also in corporations. And most of my listeners are CEOs. I work with a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses around their corporate culture. And I don't think we talk enough about feelings in the workplace and the way we make our employees and our teammates feel. We spend a lot of time in the workplace. Why not feel great working there? I think if we do feel great working there, we're going to be more productive and, of course, be happier when we go home at the end of the day. There must be so many benefits to it. Is there any connection between this and what I'm talking about and your work as it relates to quantum physics and what you call your 3 pillars of leadership?
Well, to begin with, given the principle of inseparability, that means whenever we make up separate compartments, we're tricking ourselves because nothing is separate. So from my executive coaching experience, as I cite in my article, it's a rare occasion when an executive speaks with me about issues of policy or substance in the workplace. What are they talking to me about? Their feelings, their frustrations, suppressed anger, the lack of resolving feelings. So I make a point in the podcast and in my article of the same name, Will, and I reference Ray Dalio's work at Bridgewater.
Right.
I'm in the same town as Bridgewater, so I'm very familiar with their environment. And his policy of radical transparency, I think, is good, but it is glaringly shortcoming. Radical transparency, for those who aren't familiar, means that at Bridgewater, you confront and challenge everything. That's good form. The thesis behind it is it will allow us to ultimately come to the best truth. It does not take into account emotions and feelings. And this is a sore oversight because we all have personal histories, narratives, and feelings. One word or one phrase means one thing to you, and it means something slightly different to me. This is a concept that I call shared meaning. It's part of emotional intelligence, which is, as the speaker, I cannot assume that what I intended to communicate, you received it as I intended. So I have to check in.
Yeah.
So if I use a word or a concept, I'll say, this is what I mean by this concept. What do you mean? We come to a shared meaning. So that opens up a coherent communication, altogether lacking everywhere in our world, from our marriages to our government to our business. We are having incoherent communication. Coming back to emotional intelligence,
which I think is your first, isn't that the first
yes.
of your 3 pillars of leadership, emotional intelligence?
It is.
Yes.
And I do want to say this. There are leaders in all walks of life. What I'm trying to do is to illuminate the pathway toward becoming an exceptional leader or an authentic leader, which is different than being the CEO. They don't necessarily equate. So my point here is that the qualities that create exceptional leaders, number one, can be learned. You don't need to be born with them. The first pillar is emotional intelligence. To know what I'm feeling is important. To check into what others are feeling is essential. Radical transparency at Bridgewater doesn't allow for emotional transparency. How do you feel about what we just said? What comes up for you? Because how we feel ultimately may be more impactful than what we think.
Yes.
So We operate just from thinking and not feeling. We're operating from one gear. There's no symmetry. I strive to help people integrate thinking and feeling. An exceptional leader integrates it so it's continuous. They are not separate compartments. Part of emotional intelligence is tuning into the others. And when you tune in and you try to correspond with others, it's a very exceptional feeling. People feel valued and respected when you take that moment and tune in. It's not just a transactional communication where you're providing bits of information or instructions. There's a collaborative feeling, which is very humanistic. So we are not taught emotional intelligence as a culture. We are not taught it in school. So one may wonder, where do I begin? There's a lot of great work out there on emotional intelligence. It is as important, if not more important, than our cognitive intelligence. That's the first pillar.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you. I began by asking about feelings, and you answered that question that yes, one way to make sure you're allowing for and making space for talking about feelings is to do what you just suggested, which is to ask the question, how did that make you feel? Or how is my communication making you feel? And giving them an opportunity to talk about that and bring that to the workplace. And it's going to be a healthier workplace overall, isn't it? If we are all aware of that and bringing, the tenets of emotional intelligence to the conversation.
Certainly, as a culture, we've always believed that feelings are subordinate to thoughts. Let's look at, if you're in a courtroom and an attorney makes an objection, he says that's immaterial. Immaterial. It's not of substance. It's not of material being. Our whole proclivity of value in our culture has been that feelings are a feminine energy, which previously has not been valued and respected. Boy, is that wrong. Feelings are mighty. They are impactful. They affect everything. Who you vote for as president is probably more predicated on how you feel, your visceral response, than it is on one's policies positions.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think when the people are in the box, it is about how they feel.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And no one's watching and no one's listening. And it's just, how do I feel? That's how they make the decision. And don't we make so many decisions in life based on feelings and not necessarily thoughts?
So there is a middle ground. I speak about this in my book, The Possibility Principle. I call it intellectual intuition. When you train your mind to think in wholeness, which is what I teach, how to apprehend the bigger and bigger picture, you can enter into a realm of what I call intellectual intuition. It's not hunch work. It's a deeper intuitive wisdom. There are ways to access information that go beyond the limitations of the cognitive mind. And that's all available to us when we tune in. I've learned to do that in my work. I don't only think. I quiet my thoughts and tune in. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm a psychic. I don't operate that way. But the blending of intellect and intuitive wisdom is powerful.
Yes. And of course, there are some great leaders. I mean, there are obvious ones like the Dalai Lama that you talk about in your podcast, but maybe there are others. But I think we all know that great leaders are great orators. How do they show their feelings? And it's with the authenticity that you talk about, but also, isn't it, the being vulnerable? They're willing to share something about themselves that puts whoever they're speaking to at ease, right?
Yes, so the second pillar is authenticity. So what I mean by authenticity requires a genuine self-esteem. Genuine self-esteem means, to me, that I will be true to myself. I will share what I think or feel without being disconcerted by fear or worry about what you think of me.
Yeah.
So to be an authentic, exceptional leader, you can't operate from trepidation or fear. In the workplace, so often, I've seen from my practice, Someone has a thought, a suggestion, a feeling, and they repress it because they're worried about how it will be received and what others will think. That blocks authenticity. So to reach authenticity, we need to take the model of self-esteem that we were taught and turn it on its ear. In other words, acting strong is weak because it's acting.
Yeah.
Now, in our culture, and particularly for men, we were taught to show no vulnerability.
Yeah.
Act strong. It doesn't work. Now, let's look at the opposite. If I can share my vulnerability, my self-doubt, some insecurity, if I can share it, that means I'm not worried about what you think of me. I want to hear what you think. I'm not callous, but I'm not worried. That allows me to not betray myself. This is a key, essential quality for exceptional leadership. To not stall out or be apprehensive out of fear of what will they think of me. So authenticity requires shedding fear. It doesn't mean that you're not sensitive or attuned to others, but it means you're operating from a place of your own personal integrity. So again, one may wonder, how do you develop authentic self-esteem?
Exactly. That was going to be my question. And actually, I was going to take a stage further where talk to Mel when you answer that question about I have this suspicion it's easier to do when you're older. Like we grow into losing that fear and being able to be more authentic. Why is that? How do we help younger people have this skill earlier?
I have a podcast and have written an article called Raising Resilient Children, in which I stipulate that the way to generate authentic self-esteem in children is to model it for them. Parents tend to only want to reveal the good in their lives, and they hide and are so discreet about sharing anything problematic and say, I don't want to burden my children. That's not burdening them. To not share the full flavor of our life experience means that we're not preparing them for what's coming down the road at them. So I believe that as a nation, as a culture, we suffer from horrible self-esteem. As a culture, we're actually trained to achieve what I call other esteem, which is if I can get others to approve of me and think well of me, then I feel good. But that's not self-esteem, it's other esteem. It means I'm going to reconfigure myself to get you to think well of me, but I've betrayed my own authentic self. So lack of genuine self-esteem, I believe, is underneath anxiety, depression, a whole host of diagnoses, but we have no diagnosis for self-esteem because there's no medication to prescribe. So it requires a rethinking of who am I? How would I like to experience my life? And the work's out there. I've written a copious amount about developing authentic self-esteem. That is the key to authenticity.
Yeah, that's nicely said. And I don't know if this is necessarily connected to what you said, but something that came to me when you were talking there was this concept of sharing high-lows. And I did that around the dinner table always with my kids, as to, what was your high today and what was your low today? Good. And so we're not just focusing on what was great in the day, but what was their low moment. And those were of course, many times where you really learnt what happened in their day and what was they feeling in that moment. And we do this a little bit in business too, where in the Entrepreneurs Organization, actually, where in our meetings we always share a high and a low since we met each other a month ago. We do it in our personal life, in our business life, as well as in our family life. And so you just get more comfortable sharing, being vulnerable about what was a low moment in your month. So
very, very important. It's the opposite of the mantra of put your best foot forward.
Yeah.
Part of the problem in dating, in early stage relationship, is two people put their best foot forward because they want to be liked or loved.
Yeah.
And then months or years later, you say, they're not who I thought they were. Well, no kidding. You are both disguising who you really are to try to have a conquest in a relationship. It doesn't work. Authentic self-esteem is put your true self forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So in all areas of life, be authentic in the workplace as a leader, but also in your personal lives, of course.
That's right. And so a workplace environment that invites and embraces
Yeah.
vulnerability is a workplace environment that can thrive. There's no fear. Everybody can put their full self forward without trepidation. That's the kind of environment I like to cultivate.
Okay. Well, Mel, I've heard the words used in your other two pillars, emotional intelligence and authenticity before, but this word radical emotional transparency, the third pillar, is that something you coined?
So radical emotional intimacy is part of the second pillar. The third pillar, which we'll get to, is uncertainty.
Oh, okay.
So I can't be that egocentric to think I actually coined the term. It's a large universe. I'm not aware of having read it
Okay.
elsewhere, but I'm sure it's there.
Okay.
So radical emotional intimacy serves us in all walks of life. It means there's no part of me that I need to hide. Because if that's the way I operate, I have no fear. That allows me to be fearless. I may care what you think about me, but I will not alter myself or modify myself to get you to think of me in a certain way.
Yeah.
See, that's other esteem.
Yeah.
Authentic self-esteem is, this is my perception, this is my history, these are my strengths, these are my insecurities. And I'm not handing my well-being over to you and setting you up as my judge. See, when people are afraid of judgment, it means they're judging themselves and then projecting that judgment onto someone else. When you have genuine self-worth, radical emotional intelligence, it means that you're not at risk of being judged. Others have opinions, and you may take in their opinions and reflect on them, but you don't live in fear of them.
Yeah.
So that radical, by the way, radical, you know, I was in college in the late 60s. I was an anti-war activist. Some may have called me a radical. And I looked up radical, which comes from the Greek word radix, which means root, to get to the root.
Okay.
And so when people would call me a radical, I'd say, well, thank you. Because I wasn't dealing on a symptomatic level. I was dealing with the root of the issue. And by the way, the world we live in, you need to be radical to make headway sometimes.
Yeah.
Because radical is fearless.
Absolutely.
Radical doesn't mean I'm throwing a Molotov cocktail.
Right. But also, there really is no other way to live, is there? If we're living inauthentically and hiding some part of ourselves versus living without fear and really being ourselves. I mean, what a great way to live if you can really do it. And of course, we should all try and seek to get to that point.
Well, when you come across someone who lives that way, that individual has the capacity to be an exceptional leader.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, cool. So what about uncertainty then?
Okay, so as I alluded to earlier, reality appears altogether uncertain. Yet many of us live our lives, and in the corporate environment, in the workplace, and in leadership, we live our lives as though we're playing a chess match, where we sit back, we calculate, we worry about the consequences of our actions. We're acting in a way whereby we can predict the future. Now, I'm not proposing that we don't need data and we don't need to be well informed. Of course we do, but we can never know for sure. The bold, fearless leader welcomes uncertainty and trusts that they'll be able to navigate as they go along. It's the kind of leadership I see in exceptional parents and exceptional leaders in the workplace, which is, I can't know in advance, but I trust I'll figure it out. So the embrace of uncertainty is powerful. And again, that creates possibilities. It's a true quality of a leader to embrace uncertainty, not to sit back and strategize and calculate only, but to step forward and say, this seems like the path. I don't know what will await us down that path, but I trust we can navigate it and succeed. And that requires a collaborative effort with your team and your subordinates and the people in the workplace. I picture it as an orchestra leader. And everyone, all the musicians are in concert, but to be playing from the same note, from the same musical score, it requires an orchestration, a leadership, and an embrace of uncertainty.
So, Mel, are there any examples of great leaders from the corporate world that you could cite that would exhibit these three pillars of leadership?
You know, I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking about that as I wrote the article. And regrettably, I'm sure that there are, Will, without a doubt. But from my experience, I don't know that they are integrating these elements, these three pillars, by the way. And by the way, I called it three pillars. Next month, I might see it as 5 or 6 pillars. Yeah. In other words, it's important to remember we make this all up, right? We make it all up. So, you know, you mentioned the Dalai Lama, who's obviously not in the corporate workplace.
Yeah.
But he immediately comes to mind because he clearly embraces uncertainty. He clearly is comfortable in his own authenticity. And in his emotional intelligence, he's tuned in all of those ways.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not privy, substantially, to the inner mindset of those corporate leaders to be able to describe who fits that role or not. All I can see is that these are the elements that allow for that quality of leadership. I do see it in terms of personal relationships and in terms of parenting, that when that individual can integrate those three qualities, they stand out.
Yeah.
They're exceptional.
Yeah.
So it's living life from a new rule book. We have to rewrite the rules. The old ones don't work all that well.
Yes. Well, so thanks for going through the three pillars there. A couple of things that I enjoyed, or one in particular that I'd like just to say a little bit about, is that I've been thinking about for my own life, is this concept that you talk about of many of us in our sort of latter lives are in some ways defined by a confining moment. But then you talk about how sometimes we have defining moments too. And I know for myself, I can think of where I've had defining moments, just these big ahas that have been some kind of a release for me typically too, a release from some sort of worry or something. I need to figure out what my confining moments have been, but you know, so it's a great concept to talk about, and of course, again, we're carrying those confining moments as part of our personality into the workplace, aren't we?
Of course, you couldn't leave them behind. So, in my book, in the Possibility Principle, I explained that confining moments, we can find them when we ask ourselves about our core beliefs about ourselves. How did we come to this belief? So, whatever limiting, constraining beliefs you have about yourself are confining moments. And I explain how we came to those confining beliefs. Now, we all have insights. Sadly, most people have an insight, an opening, an aha, and they don't commit to the insight. And so it's fleeting. It washes away. I decided early in life that when I have a profound insight, I will grab a hold of it, I will apprehend it, and I will say my life is different right now because of this. And that creates a defining moment where I head in a new path, and it's the opposite of a confining moment. So we have to seek to actualize defining moments where your thoughts are not telling you why you can't do something. You have to always watch your thoughts because they construct our false reality. So if I see a thought about why I can't, I look at the thought and say, how do I know that's true? Where's that thought coming from? Maybe coming from a confining moment. Defining moment would be, why can't I?
Yeah.
What's really in the way? Let me go for it.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And another thing that I enjoyed listening to was this idea about that you're saying that you talk about the nanosecond between thoughts, where you can sort of change direction a little bit instead of doing your normal reactive, predictable self. If you can be aware of the thought and that you might be going down that road, perhaps there's a nanosecond where you can create change, and little by little we can create change in ourselves and grow, right?
So in the book, I explain that quantum physics reveals that potentiality is always present in any moment. Everything is in a state of absolute potential. But I extrapolate that to the human experience and say, I too am in a state of pure potential. And the potential exists in a nanosecond between my thoughts. If I keep having the same old thoughts, I will never apprehend new potentiality. So much of my work, and I put several chapters of work into it in the book, is to develop the ability to see your thought and not become your thought. When I can see my thought, that's what I call thinking. When I can see my thought, I am above my thought, and that's where insight and wisdom come from. Now, we were never taught how to do this, so many people may think, I don't know what you're talking about, or that sounds hard. That sounds hard is a thought. You've never tried to do it. Why would you have a thought it sounds hard? How about having a thought, wow, I have no idea how to do that? That's okay. You see, old thought defends its territory. It keeps us stuck and imprisoned. Once we can learn to see our thought, which is thinking, then we can break free, and we can then apprehend in the nanosecond new insights, new defining moments, embracing uncertainty. In between the thoughts, I welcome the uncertainty. I don't know what will come, but I cherish that something new and exciting will come.
Yeah. And is that one of the benefits of meditation, Mel, that we have a chance to maybe look at our thoughts?
Well, it depends upon the type of meditation one practices. TM is different than mindfulness meditation. Meditation has tremendous benefits across the board. I'm asked what kind of meditation I do. And honestly, you see, this is an example of not being worried about what people will think of you. My response is, I don't meditate. But what I do instead is I have taught myself this technique of seeing my thought operating.
Yeah.
And when I can do that, I feel still. I feel serene. It's almost like sitting in front of a TV monitor and you're watching your thoughts being transcribed on the monitor, but you're not the thought. You're the thinker of the thought. And that creates a detachment that allows you to be at peace.
So very powerful, clearly, if you can, I think probably meditation does, for a lot of people, provide that opportunity to sort of reflect or to see your thoughts. But how more powerful is if you can do it just in real life, and catch yourself.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So I'm not limited to 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. And I'm not always doing it, of course, but thoughts leave their imprint on us. And the moment you have a thought, the thought summons up the accompanying feeling. Thought and feeling act in concert with each other. So I've learned that whenever I'm in a particular mood, whether it's a very elated high mood or a down mood, I'll check in and I'll ask myself, what was the last thought I had that created that feeling?
Yeah.
And then I'll find it, and then the whole thing makes sense. And if I'm in a negative mood and I find the thought that set it up, then I'm free. Oh, it was just that thought. It's okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm free. I've reset. I'm back in balance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very cool. It's a pleasure. There's so much more we could talk about. But in the interest of time, where can folks learn more about this, Mel? And especially, the leaders we've talked about. Of course, there's your book and your podcast. So tell us where they can find this stuff.
Okay, so my website, Mel Schwartz, MELSCHWARTZ.com, has links to my podcast, to the book, to the articles that I have written.
Okay.
And send me an email if anybody wants specific information about readings that I would recommend or particulars. Feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to knock something back in your direction that gives you some thoughts about how to head down this path.
That's sweet. So people can send you questions, and they can send those to mel@melschwartz.com.
That's correct.
Yeah. And Mel, what last thoughts can you leave for? And think again about leaders in the corporate world. What one thing could you recommend for them, based on your work and the possibility principle in general?
If they can embrace what they typically avoid. What we avoid, anything that's fearful or anxiety producing, we push it away, and that makes it more formidable. We need to do something paradoxical. Take what you feel is challenging, invite it in, and embrace it. And it then dissipates. You become the leader instead of succumbing to the anxiety and the distress that the avoidance or the poor relationship you have with your challenges. Invite them in. That's part of the vulnerability, embracing the vulnerability. That would be the takeaway, Will.
Nice. So basically, embrace their fear, and I know I try and do that. If something comes up and it's something that scares me, I think, I better go there.
Exactly.
Right.
That's right. And once you embrace it, you're no longer afraid of it.
Yeah. I began that myself with the triathlons, for example. But once I started doing them, but then I was afraid of an Ironman. But then somebody, changed my thought on that. I said, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of doing an Ironman. Therefore, I better do it.
Exactly.
And but you're already talking about more personal development ones too. But any fear, right? Step into it.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
Embrace the uncertainty.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mel. It's been a
pleasure
pleasure having you on the podcast. So folks can reach out to you at mel@melschwartz.com. Your website of the same name has links to all of your assets. And hey, thanks for the work that you're doing. And I'm so excited to be bringing this into the corporate world.
Great talking to you, Will. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Mel. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at culturezars.com, and we'll see you next time.